May 1780, South Carolina. The middle of a swamp so dense that sunlight barely reaches the ground. A small group of men is moving through water that reaches their waists. Their clothes are torn. Their faces are scratched from branches. They have been moving through this swamp for 3 days without rest. Behind them, a column of British soldiers is trying to follow, but they are losing the trail. The soldiers are confused, disoriented. Some have turned back. The rest are moving in circles. At the front of the American column, leading them deeper into terrain that no British soldier can navigate, is a man in his late 40s. His name is Francis Marion, and what nobody understood at that moment was that this single man with no formal army, no significant resources, and almost no outside support was about to become the most feared opponent in the entire British Southern campaign. He would tie down thousands of British soldiers. He would inspire an entire state to resist occupation, and he would do it from the swamps and forests that nobody else believed could be defended. His name was Francis Marion, and this is the story of how a man with nothing defeated an empire. If you had asked anyone in South Carolina in 1730 about the Marion family, they would have told you they were nobodies. French Huguenots who had fled religious persecution and settled in a remote part of South Carolina called the Low Country. It was swampland, dangerous, isolated, the kind of place where you went if you had no other options. Francis Marion was born in 1732. Possibly earlier, the exact date is unclear, like much of Marion's early life. His parents were Gabrielle Marion and Esther Cordes Marion. His father was a planter, not wealthy, not connected, just another settler trying to make a living in a hostile environment. Young Francis grew up in this isolation. There are almost no records of his childhood, no journals, no letters, nothing that tells us what he was like as a boy. But we know certain things about him. He was small, thin, not physically imposing. He would never be called handsome. He was not the kind of boy that girls noticed. What Francis Marion was tough, quietly tough. The kind of toughness that comes from growing up in a place where the environment is actively trying to kill you, where snakes in the water are a constant danger, where disease is endemic, where Native American attacks are a real possibility. Marion learned to hunt, to fish, to navigate the swamps, to read the land in a way that few white men ever could. He learned patience. He learned how to move silently. He learned how to observe without being seen. As Marion got older, he tried to become a planter like his father. He acquired land. He built a house. He was moderately successful. By the standards of rural South Carolina, he was doing fine. Not wealthy, but fine. Then the American Revolution started. When the war began in 1775, Marion was already in his early 40s. He was not the kind of man who rushed to volunteer. He was not a firebrand. He was not pushing for independence. He was a practical man who wanted to be left alone. But when the British started conscripting men, taking them by force to fight, Marion had no choice. He joined the militia. He became a captain in the Continental Army. The first years of the war did not go well for Marion. He fought in several battles and was wounded in one of them. A jump from a horse injured his leg and his foot. The injury never fully healed. For the rest of his life, Marion walked with a limp. He was in constant pain. But worse than the physical injury was what was happening to his state. In 1780, the British launched their southern campaign. They moved north from Georgia with a massive force. General Henry Clinton had over 10,000 soldiers. They were professional, well-supplied, well-trained. The American forces in South Carolina tried to stop them. At the Battle of Camden in August 1780, the British destroyed the American army. General Horatio Gates, who commanded the American forces, was utterly defeated. His army was scattered. His men were captured or killed. Gates himself fled the state in disgrace. When the dust settled, the British controlled South Carolina completely. They held Charleston. They held the interior. They held the major towns and supply routes. The American cause in the South seemed lost. Most American soldiers surrendered or fled. Many went home. Marion, however, did not flee. Instead, he retreated into the one place he knew better than anyone: the swamps. With a small group of men, sometimes as few as 20, sometimes as many as 80, Marion established a base in the swamps along the PD River in what is now known as Marion County, South Carolina. This was territory that no British officer understood. Dense vegetation, shifting water levels, hidden channels that only the locals knew. It was a place where a man could disappear and the entire British army could not find him. Marion's strategy was unlike anything the British had experienced before. He did not attempt to win battles against superior forces. He did not try to defend territory or hold fortifications. Instead, he launched a campaign of guerrilla warfare that was designed to disrupt, harass, and exhaust the British occupation. Marion would identify a British supply convoy moving through the countryside. His men would gather intelligence on its size, its route, its timing. Then, when the convoy reached an isolated spot, a river crossing, a narrow road through the forest, Marion's men would attack, suddenly, violently, then disappear back into the swamps before the British could organize a response. The British would send out pursuit parties. Marion's men would lead them on wild chases through swamps and forests, then vanish. Word of Marion's activities spread through South Carolina. At first, people were skeptical. Could a man really defeat the British in the swamps? Could a ragtag militia really threaten a professional army? But then the results became undeniable. British supply lines were being cut. Isolated garrisons were being attacked. British soldiers were being captured. In a war where the British seemed invincible, one man was proving to be an exception. By late 1780, British commanders began to realize they had a serious problem. Marion was not a major general with an army to challenge their position, but he was a constant irritant that could not be scratched. Every time they sent soldiers to hunt him, those soldiers disappeared into the swamps and did not return or returned beaten and humiliated. General Henry Clinton, the British commander, sent his best officer to deal with Marion, a man named Banastre Tarleton, who was known as a ruthless and effective cavalry commander. Tarleton organized multiple expeditions to hunt Marion down. He offered rewards for information on Marion's location. He threatened harsh punishments for anyone who aided the guerrilla leader. None of it worked. Tarleton chased Marion through swamps and forests for weeks. His cavalry could not move effectively in the terrain. His supplies could not be maintained in the wilderness. His horses died from exhaustion. His men became exhausted and demoralized. At one point, Marion led Tarleton and his cavalry on a chase that lasted hours. They rode through swamps, crossed rivers, navigated through dense forest. The entire time, Tarleton was convinced he was about to catch Marion. The guerrilla leader was just ahead. One more mile, one more river. But Marion knew the terrain. He knew exactly where Tarleton was going before Tarleton knew himself. He could read the landscape in ways that no British officer could. And in the end, Tarleton's exhausted cavalry rode back into the British camp. Having achieved nothing, Tarleton was furious. He complained to his superiors that Marion was impossible to catch. The guerrilla leader had the support of the local population. He had perfect knowledge of the terrain. He could move at will through the swamps. Conventional military tactics did not work against him. As 1780 turned into 1781, Marion's influence grew. He was no longer just a minor nuisance. He had become a symbol of American resistance. Young men throughout South Carolina were joining him. Militia units that had surrendered to the British were rejoining Marion's force. Civilians who had accepted British occupation were beginning to resist again. The British realized that they could not occupy South Carolina with military force alone, as long as Marion was in the field. He did not have an army. He could not win battles. But he could make occupation so costly and so difficult that it became politically impossible for the British to maintain. In the spring of 1781, the British situation began to change. Not because of Marion's military actions, but because of larger strategic events. The main British army under Lord Cornwallis was moving north into North Carolina. British forces in South Carolina were being reduced. Reinforcements were not coming. Marion sensed his opportunity. He began to increase the scale of his operations. His small band of guerrillas grew into a force of several hundred. He coordinated with other militia leaders in the state. He attacked British supply lines with increasing frequency and increasing force. The British, stretched thin and weakened, could not respond effectively. They could hold the towns they occupied, but the countryside belonged to Marion. By the time British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown in October 1781, South Carolina was already lost to British control. The British held only a few isolated forts and the city of Charleston. Everywhere else, Marion and his militia held sway. When the Revolutionary War officially ended in 1783, Francis Marion had not won a single major battle. He had not defeated the British in open combat. He had not captured any significant territory, but he had done something that many generals with much larger armies failed to do. He had made it politically impossible for Britain to continue occupying his state. After the war, Marion's life became ordinary in a way that his war years had not been. He was promoted to general by the state of South Carolina, but the promotion was largely ceremonial. The war was over. There was no army to command. Marion tried to return to his plantation and his farming life, but the war had changed him. Years of living in swamps and forests, of sleeping in the open, of constant danger. It had broken something in him. He was older than his years. His health was failing. He did serve in the South Carolina legislature for a time. He represented his district, but he was not a political man. He didn't seek power or advancement. He simply wanted to live quietly. Marion married late in life, at the age of 52. He married a woman named Mary Vidot, who was from a wealthy family. They had no children. They lived on his plantation quietly for the remaining years of his life. But the American people did not forget him. Marion became a legend. Storytellers traveled through South Carolina at the south, telling tales of the swamp fox. They exaggerated his exploits. They made him larger than life. Some of the stories were true. Some were pure invention. By the time of Marion's death in 1795, he had become a symbol of American resistance. The idea that one man with a small force fighting from terrain that gave him advantage could resist and eventually defeat a much larger, more professional force. This became part of American mythology. Marion's tactics influenced military thinking for generations. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflict, using terrain to advantage, using superior knowledge of the landscape to offset superior numbers and weapons. These became standard principles of irregular warfare. But here is the thing that often gets forgotten in the legendary retelling. Marion did not enjoy the war. He wasn't a warrior by temperament. He was a practical man who did what he had to do. In letters from his later years, Marion expressed weariness with the violence. He wanted peace. He wanted to farm. He wanted a quiet life. There is something about Francis Marion that stays with you after all the battles and all the legends and all the stories. When he was in the swamps in 1780, water up to his waist, his small band of men around him, the entire British occupation force unable to touch him, Marion didn't think he was a legend. He didn't think he was making history. He was simply a man who knew the swamps better than anyone else, who understood the terrain better than anyone else, who had the advantage that comes from home field knowledge. The British had superior weapons, superior numbers, superior organization. But Marion had something that no foreign occupier could ever have. He belonged to the land. He knew every river, every trail, every hidden path. And in the end, that knowledge was worth more than all of Britain's advantages. Marion proved something profound about warfare and about resistance, that you do not need a large army to be effective, that you do not need to win battles to win a war. That understanding your terrain can be more valuable than superior firepower. But more importantly, Marion proved something about commitment. He was not fighting for glory. He was not fighting for personal advancement. He was fighting because his His home was being occupied and he could not accept that. When he returned to his plantation after the war, Marion was not celebrated the way other generals were. He did not become a national hero like Washington or Greene. He became a regional legend, a folk hero, the man who defended South Carolina when professional soldiers could not. And perhaps that is more fitting than fame would have been. Marion did not want to be a national hero. He wanted to protect his swamps, his home, his people, and he did. If this story interested you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which forgotten Revolutionary War hero you think deserves more recognition. Drop a like if you made it this far, and we'll see you in the next one.